Friends, if this is your first time here, hit subscribe and stick around. There is a lot more where this came from. And this is the penny ledger. Let's go. In 1953, a dairy farmer in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, bought a 90-acre farm for $14,000. Cash. No bank involved, no mortgage officer, no closing costs. The money came from a wooden box under the floorboards of his father's milkhouse. 3 generations had been filling that box. When the farmer died in 2004, the box still held $186,000. None of it had ever earned a cent of interest. None of it had ever needed to. Here is the part that should bother you. The average American household in 2024 carries over $10,000 in revolving credit card debt alone, according to a NerdWallet analysis of Federal Reserve data. The interest rate on that debt runs about 23%, which means the average American family is paying the bank roughly $2,400 a year just for the privilege of having already spent money it did not have. The Amish carry no credit cards. They have not carried credit cards since Bank of America mailed the first Bank Americards to 60,000 unsuspecting residents of Fresno, California in 1958. The Amish watched that revolution happen from a buggy on a country road. And they kept filling the box onto the floorboards. The question is not why the Amish refused. The question is how they built an entire financial system across 170 years that made the refusal possible. And this is where it gets interesting. Donald Kraybill, professor of sociology at Elizabethtown College and the foremost living scholar on Amish society, spent 4 decades studying these communities. In his book, The Riddle of Amish Culture, first published in 1989, Kraybill identified the core mechanism. The Amish did not simply reject modernity. They negotiated with it. Every technology, every financial instrument, every consumer product was evaluated by a single standard. Does this strengthen the community, or does it weaken it? If the answer was weaken, the bishop said no. And the bishop's no carried the weight of 3 centuries of collective memory. But before we get to the bishop, we need to understand the architecture. The Amish financial system rests on a word most outsiders have never heard: Ordnung. It is German for order, and among the Amish, it means the unwritten code that governs every aspect of daily life. What you wear, how you travel, what tools you use, how you handle money. The Ordnung is not printed in any manual. It lives in the collective memory of each church district, reviewed and reaffirmed twice a year at the council service before communion. Each district, typically 20 to 40 households, maintains its own version. The Ordnung in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, is not identical to the Ordnung in Holmes County, Ohio, but on money, the districts agree on the fundamentals. You do not borrow what you cannot repay quickly. You do not display what you have earned. You do not allow one family's prosperity to fracture the community's equality. That last one is the load-bearing wall. The roots go deeper than most people realize. The Amish trace their financial discipline to the Dordrecht Confession of 1632, adopted by Dutch Mennonite leaders in the Netherlands, and later embraced by the Amish as a foundational document. Article 17 of the Dordrecht Confession established the practice of shunning, the Meidung, the mechanism by which a community enforces its standards. A man who flaunts wealth, who buys a slightly fancier buggy lamp than the Ordnung permits, who mortgages his future to impress his neighbors, that man does not simply face disapproval. He faces the possibility of being cut off from every person he has ever known: his family, his church, his customers, his world. The Schleitheim Confession of 1527, written by Michael Sattler just months before his execution, had already laid the groundwork. Separation from the world, non-resistance, community above self. Sattler paid for those ideas with his life. The Amish honored them by building an economy around them. So let's talk about how that economy actually works, not the theology, the mechanics, the dollars and cents of being Amish in America. The barn raising is the one everyone knows, and the one everyone gets slightly wrong. It is not charity. It is infrastructure. When a family needs a new barn, word goes to the bishop on Wednesday. By Saturday morning, 200 to 300 men arrive at sunrise. The family covers materials. The community covers labor. A barn goes up in a single day. Kraybill documented raisings in Lancaster County where the materials ran $1,200 to $1,500, while an English contractor's quote for the same structure exceeded $9,000. The practice has continued without interruption since the early 1700s. But here's what outsiders miss. The barn raising is not a gift. It is an account. Every man who swings a hammer knows that when his barn burns, when lightning splits his ridge beam, when a nor'easter peels off his roof, those same 300 men will be standing in his yard at dawn. No insurance adjuster, no deductible, no claim form, no premium increase. The barn raising is a savings account denominated in calloused hands, and the interest rate is reciprocity. That reciprocity extends to something far more consequential than barns, the mutual aid fund. The Amish carry no commercial health insurance, no homeowner's insurance, no life insurance. Instead, each family contributes to the church district's aid fund. The deacon collects, typically after each church service. He records contributions in a ledger. According to a 2024 study published in the journal Healthcare, researchers surveying over 1,000 Amish households across 12 states found that 81% reported membership in a mutual aid organization. Annual healthcare spending through these organizations ranged from $500 to $18,000 per member. The earliest formal Amish aid plan dates to 1859 in Ontario, with the first American version organized in Bluffton, Ohio, in 1866. But the informal practice, neighbors collecting for neighbors, stretches back to the founding settlements. The mechanism matters. When an Amish family faces a $14,000 hospital bill, they do not file a claim. The father walks into the billing office with the bishop and the deacon. They lay cash on the desk. No insurance means no insurance company middleman, and hospitals know it. The cash discount is real, often 40 to 60% off the sticker price. That $14,000 bill becomes $6,000 or $7,000. The aid fund covers a portion. The family pays the remainder over months, not years. No interest, no collections agency, no medical bankruptcy. The hospital gets paid, the family stays solvent, and no insurance company skims 20% off the top for the privilege of processing paperwork. Now, here is a number that will recalibrate your sense of scale. In 2024, the Amish population of North America reached 400,910 people, according to the Young Center for Anabaptist and Pietist Studies at Elizabethtown College. That population has increased by 125% since the year 2000, when it stood at roughly 178,000. It doubles every 20 years. Not through conversion. Almost entirely through birth rate and retention. Average family size is 5 or more children. The retention rate, meaning the percentage of Amish children who choose to join the church as adults, runs above 85%. There are now 675 settlements across 32 states and 3 Canadian provinces. Remember that number. 400,000 people. Living without credit cards, without commercial insurance, without mortgages in most cases, in the wealthiest and most indebted nation in human history. And their system is not shrinking. It is doubling every 2 decades. Let me show you why. And this requires walking through the rules one at a time, because each one reinforces the next. Remove any single rule, and the architecture weakens. Remove 3, and it collapses. They are not a list. They are a load-bearing structure. The cash-only rule. No Amish family carries a credit card. Not in 1955, not in 2024. You walk into the store with bills in a leather pouch. You walk out with what those bills could buy, nothing more. The rule was formalized in District Ordnung in the 1880s, when traveling salesmen first brought installment plans to Lancaster County. The bishops looked at installment buying and saw exactly what it was: a mechanism for spending money that did not yet exist. They said no. A young couple in the 1960s saved 7 years before purchasing their first buggy. They borrowed from family in the interim. They felt patient, not poor. The distinction matters. The bishop's veto. Before any major purchase, a man sits at the bishop's kitchen table. The bishop asks 3 questions. Can you pay cash? Will this weaken your family? Will this weaken the community? That is the entire financial advisory apparatus. No spreadsheet, no risk assessment algorithm. 3 questions from a man whose authority derives not from a seminary degree, but from the community's trust. A farmer in 1971 who wanted a second farm was told no. He died debt-free in 1998. His neighbor, who bought against counsel, lost both farms in the 1982 agricultural crisis and left the community. The bishop was a brake on a man's own enthusiasm, and the brake worked. The no-mortgage inheritance. When a father transfers a farm to his son, he does not sell at market rate. He sells at a fraction. A 1962 transfer in Lancaster County was recorded at $8,000, roughly a third of market value. The son owned it outright by 1970. Now consider what that same land is worth today. Lancaster County farmland prices hit $40,000 to $50,000 per acre in 2024, according to data from Acre Trader and Lancaster Farming. Some parcels have been quoted at $65,000 an acre. A 90-acre farm at $50,000 per acre is $4.5 million. In today's money, that $8,000 transfer in 1962 was the equivalent of handing your son a winning lottery ticket. Except it was not luck. It was a father refusing to let a bank stand between his son and land his grandfather had cleared a century earlier. The apprenticeship wage. In 1972, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Wisconsin versus Yoder that the Amish could not be compelled to send their children to school beyond the 8th grade. The court found, in a 7-0 decision, that Amish religious beliefs and their way of life were, and I am quoting Chief Justice Berger here, inseparable and interdependent. What this means in practice is that an Amish boy leaves school at 14 and apprentices with his father, his uncle, or another community member. He works sun up to sundown. He earns a modest wage, and he spends almost none of it. By marriage age, typically 21 or 22, an Amish young man has saved $14,000 to $30,000 in cash in a coffee tin. He buys his first farm or shop outright. No student loans, no car payments, no credit card balance from a spring break trip to Cancun. Just 6 years of labor and a tin can. And the women built their own economy, quietly. Within the boundaries the Ordnung allowed, Amish women earned separate income from quilting, working in the evenings after the children slept. A quilt sold for $300 to $500 in the 1970s and 80s. Materials ran $20 to $30. The profit went into a coffee tin in the bedroom closet, untouched by household expenses. A skilled quilter could accumulate $4,000 to $8,000 across a working life. Kraybill, in his interviews with Amish women for Amish Enterprise, which he co-authored with Stephen Nolt, documented families where the grandmother's quilt fund paid for grandchildren's medical expenses. The quilt was a woman's savings account, stitched one square at a time, invisible to the tax code, and answerable to no one but her. The one buggy rule. The family owns one buggy, not two. You schedule the week around it. A buggy in the early 1980s cost about $1,800 and lasted 40 years. Compare that to the English family next door cycling through 9 automobiles in the same period at a combined cost north of $90,000. In today's money, adjusted for inflation, that is roughly $230,000 on transportation alone. The Amish family spent $1,800. The rule traces to an 1862 Ordnung reaffirmation that material multiplication weakens spiritual unity. One vehicle forces the family to coordinate, to stay close, to plan. It is a calendar enforced by a single set of wheels, the wood stove economy. Amish homes heat with wood from the family woodlot. The cost per winter in the 1970s ran about $40 for blade sharpening. An English oil furnace that same year cost $890 in fuel alone. In 2024 dollars, that oil bill translates to roughly $5,000 a winter. The Amish family's cost translates to about $230. The difference is not marginal. It is a mortgage payment. And it compounds every single winter for 50 years. The garden that fed 12. A half-acre kitchen garden fed the household year-round. In 1970, a family of 12 in Holmes County, Ohio, grew 80% of their food from that garden. Estimated annual savings ran $1,400, which in today's money is roughly $10,000 a year. The wife had not purchased a seed packet since 1948. She saved seeds from each harvest. 22 years of accumulated botanical knowledge lived in her mason jars. Which tomato survived the frost of '62? Which bean held through the drought of '66? The garden was a grocery store the family had built into the ground, and the inventory improved every year. The make-do repair ethic. When something broke, you fixed it. You did not replace it. A failed washing machine engine in 1968 was rebuilt for $8 in parts. A cracked buggy wheel in 1991 was respoked for $14. Across a lifetime, the refusal to accept a manufacturer's verdict that something was beyond repair saved an Amish family an estimated $40,000 in today's money. The harness shop on Route 340 in Lancaster County, opened in 1923, has repaired wheels for 4 generations of the same families. The father who taught his son to disassemble a hay rake on a Saturday morning was not fixing a machine. He was transmitting a curriculum. The lesson was simple. A broken thing is not a problem. It is an opportunity to understand how the thing works. The Sunday money refusal. No Amish business operates on Sunday. No selling, no buying. You close Saturday evening, and you do not reopen until Monday morning. A 1972 study estimated that the practice saved the average household $260 a year in impulse purchases alone. In today's money, that is about $1,900. The observance connects directly to the Schleitheim Confession of 1527, to Michael Sattler's insistence on separation from worldly rhythms. Sunday was a fence around the wallet, and the fence was maintained for 5 centuries. The bulk buy network. Families pooled grocery orders. Every Friday, one woman drove a hired van to the bulk store with 12 families' lists: 400 pounds of flour, 200 pounds of sugar, 80 pounds of salt. Cost per pound dropped 40%. A typical district in the late 1980s saved roughly $3,200 a year through collective purchasing. For the woman who organized the route, it was a cooperative running quietly out of a buggy. No membership card, no corporate overhead, just 12 lists and a van. The wedding without debt. In 1965, a Lancaster County wedding cost the host family $90 in cash outlay. Food came from the family's own stores. Dishes were borrowed from the church. The bride's dress was sewn from $7 of fabric. 300 guests sat on borrowed benches in a cleared-out barn. In 2024, the average American wedding costs $35,000, according to the Knott's annual survey. 1 in 3 couples goes into debt to pay for it. The Amish wedding declared publicly that this marriage would begin debt-free. The $90 wedding was not cheap. It was a statement. The invisible wealth rule. No Amish family displays money. Ever. The successful furniture maker dresses identically to the struggling tenant farmer. He drives the same buggy. He eats the same food. His house looks the same from the road. A bishop in 1996 told a young man whose buggy lamp was slightly fancier than the Ordnung allowed, a phrase that translates roughly to, "He who shows it loses it." The young man removed the lamp. The invisible wealth rule, codified in the Dordrecht Confession of 1632, eliminates the single most powerful driver of consumer spending in America: keeping up with the neighbors. If nobody displays wealth, there is nothing to keep up with. The arms race never starts. The credit card stays in the drawer. Except the Amish do not have a drawer, because they do not have a credit card. The father's ledger. Every Amish father keeps a small ledger. Income on the left, expenses on the right. Updated every Sunday evening. Written in pencil. Shown to no one except the son who will eventually inherit the farm. A 1947 ledger from near Intercourse, Pennsylvania, recently donated to a local historical society, contained 51 years of weekly entries in the same handwriting. 51 years. Every dollar that came in, every dollar that went out. No app, no spreadsheet, no financial advisor charging 1% of assets under management. A pencil, a notebook, and the discipline to open it every Sunday for half a century. And now we return to the wooden box under the floorboards. That dairy farmer in 1953. He earned $3,100 a year from his dairy. His family spent $2,200. The gap was $900. $900 a year defended every week for 51 years. That gap paid for the farm, raised 8 children, replaced the buggy twice, and filled that box with $186,000 in cash. $900 a year. $75 a month, roughly $17.30 a week. That was the gap. It was not a fortune. It was not a windfall. It was not a stock tip or a crypto play or a side hustle scaling to 6 figures. It was the most boring sentence in any financial plan. Spend less than you earn. The Amish bishops of Lancaster, Holmes, and Elkhart counties have been quietly enforcing that sentence for 170 years. Not because it is clever, because it is the only rule that makes all the other rules possible. The barn raising only works if families have the margin to donate a day's labor. The mutual aid fund only works if families have cash to contribute. The no-mortgage inheritance only works if the father has savings to absorb the discount. The apprenticeship only works if the young man can afford to earn $20 a week because his family's expenses are already covered by the gap. Remove the gap, and every other rule collapses. Keep the gap open, and you can buy a farm in cash while your neighbor cannot make the mortgage on a tract house. Kraybill put it most precisely in his 2021 book, What the Amish Teach Us, published by Johns Hopkins University Press. The Amish, he wrote, have solved a problem the rest of the American economy has not. How to maintain financial stability across generations without institutional debt. That sentence appeared in an academic book from a university press. It did not go viral. It did not trend. It did not become a TikTok. It sat quietly on a library shelf, much like the wooden box sat quietly under the floorboards. 400,000 people. No credit cards, no commercial insurance, no mortgages in most cases. Exposed to the same economy, the same inflation, the same recessions, the same medical costs as every other American, and yet doubling every 20 years, while the rest of us refinance. We called them stubborn. We called them backward. We are now $33 trillion in national debt, and they are not. The box is still under the floorboards. The ledger is still in pencil. The bishop still asks 3 questions, and the gap is still open. If this one sat a little differently than you expected, that is because the Amish played a longer game than any Wall Street strategist, and they did it without a single spreadsheet. If we hit 50,000 likes on this one, I will do a full episode on how the Amish built a business empire without electricity. That story is even stranger than this one. By tradition, write in the comments, the gap. 2 words. If you understand what it means, you already know more than most financial advisors. This was Charlie from the Penny Ledger. See you all